Chapter 7, Section 2, Convention and Compromise. A call for change. Many Americans called for the Articles of Confederation to be changed. They believed that the Confederation government was too weak to deal with the nation's problems. Those problems, however, were very difficult to solve. After the Revolutionary War, the United States experienced a depression, a period when economic activity slows and unemployment increases. Southern plantations were damaged during the war, and rice exports dropped sharply. Trade also decreased when the British closed profitable West Indies markets to American merchants. The little money that the government did have went to pay foreign debts, resulting in a serious currency shortage. Shays Rebellion. American farmers suffered because they could not sell their goods. They had trouble paying the money requested by the states to meet Revolutionary War debts. As a result, state officials seized farmers' lands to pay their debts and threw many farmers in jail. Grumblings of protest soon grew to revolt. Resentment grew especially strong in Massachusetts. Farmers viewed the new government as just another form of tyranny. They wanted the government to issue paper money and make new policies to relieve debtors. In a petition to state officials, a number of farmers proclaimed, "Surely your honor are not strangers to the distresses of the people, but know that many of our good inhabitants are now confined in jail for debt and taxes." In 1786, angry farmers lashed out. Led by Daniel Shays, a former Continental Army captain, they forced courts in western Massachusetts to close so judges could not take away farmers' lands. In January 1787, Shays led more than 1,000 farmers toward the federal arsenal in Springfield, Massachusetts, in search of guns and ammunition. The state militia ordered the advancing farmers to halt and then fired over their heads, but the farmers did not stop. The militia fired again, killing 4 farmers. Shays and his followers scattered, and the uprising was over. Shays' rebellion frightened many Americans. They worried that the government could not control the unrest and prevent violence. On hearing of the rebellion, George Washington wondered whether mankind, when left to themselves, are unfit for their own government. Thomas Jefferson, minister to France at the time, had a different view. A little rebellion now and then, he wrote, is a good thing. The issue of slavery. The Revolutionary War brought attention to the contradiction between the American battle for liberty and the practice of slavery. Between 1776 and 1786, 11 states, all except South Carolina and Georgia, outlawed or heavily taxed the importation of enslaved people. Although slavery was not a major source of labor in the North, it existed and was legal in all northern states. Many individuals and groups began to work to end the institution of slavery in America. In 1774, Quakers in Pennsylvania organized the first anti-slavery society. 6 years later, Pennsylvania passed a law that provided for the gradual freeing of enslaved people. Between 1783 and 1804, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New York, and New Jersey passed laws that gradually ended slavery. Still, free African Americans faced discrimination. They were barred from many public places, and few states gave free African Americans the right to vote. The children of most free blacks had to attend separate schools. Free African Americans established their own their own institutions, churches, schools, and mutual aid societies to seek social and economic opportunities. The states south of Pennsylvania clung to the institution of slavery. The plantation system was built on slavery, and many Southerners feared that their economy could not survive without it. Nonetheless, an increasing number of slaveholders began freeing the enslaved people that they held after the war. Virginia passed a law that encouraged manumission, the freeing of individual enslaved persons, and the state's population of free African Americans grew. The abolition of slavery in the North divided the new country on the critical issue of whether people should be allowed to keep other human beings in bondage. This division came at the time when many American leaders decided that the Articles of Confederation needed to be strengthened. In the summer of 1787, when state representatives assembled to plan a new government, they compromised on the issue. It would take a civil war to settle the slavery question. The Constitutional Convention. The American Revolution led to a union of 13 states that had not yet created a nation. Some leaders were satisfied with a system of independent state governments that resembled the old colonial governments. Others supported a strong national government. They demanded a reform of the Articles of Confederation. Two Americans who were active in the movement for change were James Madison, a Virginia planter, and Alexander Hamilton, a New York lawyer. In September 1786, Hamilton proposed calling a convention or meeting in Philadelphia to discuss trade issues. He also suggested that this convention consider what possible changes were needed to make the Constitution of the federal government adequate to the exigencies of the Union. At first, George Washington was not enthusiastic about the movement to revise the Articles of Confederation. When Washington heard about Shays' Rebellion, however, he had changed his mind. After Washington agreed to attend the Philadelphia Convention, the meeting took on greater significance. The Philadelphia meeting began in May 1787 and continued through one of the hottest summers on record. The 55 delegates included planters, merchants, lawyers, physicians, generals, governors, and a college president. 3 of the delegates were under 30 years of age, and one, Benjamin Franklin, was over 80. Many were well educated at a time when only one white man in 1,000 went to college. 26 of the delegates had college degrees. Other groups, such as Native Americans, African Americans, and women, were not considered part of the political process, so they were not represented at the convention. The presence of George Washington and Benjamin Franklin ensured that many people would trust the convention's work. 2 Philadelphians also played key roles. James Wilson often read Franklin's speeches and did important work on the details of the Constitution. Governor Morris, a powerful speaker and writer, wrote the final draft of the Constitution. James Madison was a keen supporter of a strong national government, and Madison's careful notes documented the convention's work. Madison is often called the father of the Constitution because he was the author of the basic plan of government that the convention adopted. Organization. The delegates chose George Washington to preside over the meetings. The delegates decided that each state would have one vote on all questions. A simple majority vote of those states present would make decisions. No meetings could be held unless delegates from at least 7 of the 13 states were present. Sessions were not open to the public, which allowed the delegates to talk freely. The Virginia Plan. The convention opened with a surprise from the Virginia delegation. Edmund Randolph proposed the creation of a strong national government. He introduced the Virginia Plan, which was largely the work of James Madison. The plan called for a 2-house legislature, a chief executive chosen by the legislature, and a court system. The members of the lower house of the legislature would be elected by the people. The members of the upper house would be chosen by the lower house. In both houses, the number of representatives would be proportional or corresponding in size to the population of each state. This would give Virginia many more delegates than Delaware, the state with the smallest population. Delegates from Delaware, New Jersey, and other small states immediately objected. They preferred the Confederation system in which all states were represented equally. Delegates who were unhappy with the Virginia Plan rallied around William Paterson of New Jersey. On June 15th, he presented an alternative plan. This plan revised the Articles of Confederation, which was all the convention was empowered to do. New Jersey Plan. Paterson's New Jersey Plan kept the Confederation's one-house legislature with one vote for each state. Congress, however, could not set taxes and regulate trade, powers it did not have under the Articles of Confederation. Congress would elect a weak executive branch consisting of more than one person. Paterson argued that the convention should not deprive the smaller states of the equality they had under the Articles. Thus, his plans was designed to simply to amend or improve the Articles. Compromise wins out. The delegates had to decide whether to simply revise the Articles of Confederation or write a constitution for a new national government. On June 19th, the states voted to work toward a national government based on the Virginia Plan, but they still had to resolve the thorny issue of representation that divided large and small states. The Great Compromise. The convention appointed a committee to resolve their disagreements. George Sherman of Connecticut suggested what came to be known as the Great Compromise. A compromise is an agreement between 2 or more sides in which each side gives up some of what it wants. Sherman proposed a 2-house legislature. In the lower house, the House of Representatives, the number of seats for each state would vary based on the state's population. In the upper house, the Senate, each state would have 2 members. 3/5 compromise. The delegates also compromised on how to count enslaved people. Southern states wanted to include enslaved people in their population counts to gain delegates in the House of Representatives. Northern states objected because enslaved people were legally considered property. Some Northern delegates argued that enslaved people as property should be counted for the purpose of taxation but not representation. Neither side, however, considered giving enslaved people the right to vote. The committee's solution, known as the Three-Fifths Compromise, was to count each enslaved person as three-fifths of a free person for determining both taxation and representation. In other words, every 5 enslaved persons would equal 3 free persons. The delegates voted to approve the Three-Fifths Compromise. Slave trade. Northern states banned slave trade within their borders and wanted to prohibit it nationwide. Southern states considered slavery and the slave trade essential to their economies. To keep the southern states in the nation, Northerners agreed that the Congress could not interfere with the slave trade until 1808. Bill of Rights. George Mason of Virginia proposed a Bill of Rights to be included in the Constitution. Some delegates worried that without a Bill of Rights, the new national government might abuse its powers. However, most delegates believed that the Constitution, with its carefully defined list of government powers, provided adequate protection of individual rights. Mason's proposal was defeated. Approving the Constitution. The committees finished their work in late summer. On September 17, 1787, the delegates assembled in Philadelphia to sign the document. 3 delegates refused to sign: Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts and Edmund Randolph and George Mason of Virginia. Gerry and Mason would not sign without a Bill of Rights. The approved draft of the Constitution was then sent to the states for consideration. The approval process, which for the Articles of Confederation required a unanimous vote of all the states. The new Constitution, however, required 9 of 13 states to approve it. After that, the new government would come into existence.